It's true that we were among the first who received the Getty grant for in the Keeping It Modern initiative, but we have not yet implemented it. We have made a conservation management plan, and we can talk about that. And maybe just a few words about the future, or how we see the future. But I think Jonas will be telling more about that. I will start with some general things I would like to say about conservation management plans, how they became in our awareness, and how we try to use them now and in the future. First, just a few words about myself. I'm an architect by schooling. I graduated in 1992, and then I worked for many years as a state official in the National Board of Antiquities, dealing with modern architecture conservation and protection issues. During that time, I supervised more than 300 sites, modern architecture sites, and wrote more than 1,000 statements on restoration. And after, or during that time, I made my licentiate thesis on 1930s apartment buildings in Helsinki and in Finland in general. So 1930s is my specialty decade, so to say. In 2007, I became a member of the council at ICROM, which is a UNESCO established institution for the study and training of restoration in Rome. And that was, they were a very nice 4 years in my life to be able to work part-time in Rome. And after that, I worked in the Ministry of Environment, making legislation on renovations. And the last 4 years, I've been the director of the Alvar Foundation, where I can hopefully combine all these experiences that I have in the field of modern architecture conservation. So, Paimio Sanatorium was the starting point for at least two things. We were able to advance building protection with the Paimio Sanatorium. It was one of the first modern buildings ever protected in Finland. We were also able to make the conservation management plan in a situation where there was a big change in the use of the building when it changed from a hospital into a rehabilitation center for children and youth. And the third thing that we're now proceeding with is a World Heritage nomination of a series of Aalto designed sites in the world. And the Paimio Sanatorium is still included in this serial nomination process. We have given it a headline, Architecture for Cure, because taking care of people is what the building is all about. And is a very good example of Alvar Aalto's humanistic approach to modern architecture, and also the human scale, which was always in his mind. The Paimio Conservation Management Plan is based on a couple of things. Some of these were introduced to us by the Getty. Some we already knew, and some of them are even things that we have been involved in developing. So, first of all, to understand the concept of outstanding universal value, the OUV, UNESCO World Heritage Convention has written a guidebook, operational guidelines, and this is one basis for evaluation. And this is also used when we choose the sites that are going to be in our Aalto nomination. Then we have used successfully already in a couple of cases in Finland the heritage impact assessment method introduced by the international ICOMOS organization. We of course know the Madrid document, and we are waiting for the step 2, second document, any day now, hopefully going into more detail and practical things, like the Burra Charter introduced by Australian ICOMOS already in 1979 and revised in 2013. Then there is the Conservation of Modern Architecture Initiative, CMAI, by the Getty Conservation Institute, and this initiative is closely in contact with the Keeping It Modern initiative, and started a couple of years earlier. I think it already in 2012 or even 11. And I think the first Keeping It Modern grants were given out in 2014. So the discussion started at the Getty Conservation Institute already a couple of years earlier. And I also took part in that convention or colloquium they had in 2013, and my subject there was the modern architecture conservation courses that we have organized 5 times together with ICROM. About the outstanding universal value, when we think about rating things or putting things into order, we always have to have some kind of method. We have to have a framework for discussion, and we want to have the same kind of method for every building and site we consider in, for instance, in this Aalto nomination. So what we do is we either consider monuments, groups of buildings or sites, places of high interest. We think about the uniqueness or extreme rarity. We think about a major artistic achievement, what could that be? And a masterpiece of human creative genius. And these are also parallel to the UNESCO criteria for World Heritage sites. And what is this heritage impact assessment then? Usually there is a problem when we have to use this method. There has to be a conflict of interest. And in these cases, an independent jury or a group of specialists gather, and they give certain suggestions and specifications for the client or the two parties that are in conflict. and there was an Aalto building in Rovaniemi in Lapland where we had this kind of conflict of interest, and they were designing an enlargement for the building, and the officials thought that it cannot be expanded in that way, and as a result of this heritage impact assessment, we suggested that they change the designer. And so new architects started with the project, and there was no visible enlargement made for the theater. Okay, and why is the method used? It gives a way for the builder to back up on bad decisions in a civilized manner. And that's why this independent specialist panel is so important. The people in the panel, they also have to be specialists in the field, and they should also have impact in themselves. So they should be people you know and who have respect in the field. I'm not going to talk to you a lot about the Madrid document. I'm just going to say that it's the basis for 20th century evaluations and also treatment of sites. And why we need a Madrid document is that internationally, we should have at least some criteria for the restorations we make on modern buildings, so that we can advance the international community when we deal with our own problems, and so at least to some point we must have a joint language for restorations, and that's one goal for the Madrid document. And there's also a practical part. The document seeks to find ways to evaluate and conserve sites of the modern movement without having any doubts about the significance of the buildings and sites. And this all adds up in the projects you're doing and we have done, and I think these experiences should be used in making new declarations in the field. Some issues that concern the Pioneer Sanatorium, but also other modern buildings. Some people have said that the 1920s and 1930s architecture was affected more by doctors than architects. And I think to some extent that is true. So we're talking about health, and we're talking about safety, and we're talking about quality, and we're still talking about these things. Just this morning we were talking about regulations in Croatia and in Finland, and what else are these building regulations than taking care of health, safety and quality of building. So in that way we're also mentally still in the 1920s and 30s. So how I see health issues are a good inside climate, like temperature and clear air. We don't want fungus or other materials that cause allergies. We don't like draft, like here. In the safety issues are, of course, fire protection, protection from falling, protection from noise. And the quality issues are accessibility, comfort, to be able to control, for instance, temperature yourself. That's very important for comfort. And energy efficiency. It's a quality thing. It's not something that has to do with safety or health. And still many energy efficiency legislators want us to think that it's some kind of health issue to have energy efficiency. No, it's all about money. And in modern architecture conservation, we can go back to Vitruvius in Rome and talk about firmitas, utilitas, and venustas. But what it means in modern architecture, the firmitas, or the strength, would be building physics, performance of the building, and, for instance, embodied energy, which is a big issue that we have to take into consideration when talking about energy efficiency in the future. Utilitas, usability, keeping the building in use, very important up north, but also an important issue here. Adaptive use of the building. If you cannot have the original use, the new use should adapt to the building, and not vice versa, because in many cases the building is made to adapt the new use. And accessibility is also in this part. How about the Venus stars? Of course, aesthetic quality, cultural sustainability, and preservation of modern architecture, because it's not self-evident that modern architecture is preserved in the world. We have some repair principles that we like to use, and one of them is constant management. We cannot leave the building after a repair for 20 years and then come back and see how well it's doing. We have to do some things all the time. And so constant management is something we also seek in the conservation management plan. And we give advice to the owner and caretaker of the building and site that what things you have to do every day, what things you have to do every week, every month, every year, every 5 years. So this is very important. And we have recommendations, urgency order of repairs, and these are based on a proper condition study of the building. And for instance, going back to energy efficiency again, if we change the facade material or appearance, it's comparative to a construction of a new building. If we think about townscape or cityscape or urban landscape. So it's not a repair thing, and that's why in these modern architecture, valuable buildings, the changes in facades should be the last thing we do on the outside architecture. Usability is a prime factor in decision making. Major renovation is usually avoidable. And then we have some design approaches and concepts. We have a thing called conservation restoration, architectural conservation, architectural problem solving. This is something a lot of architects consider the best way of treating buildings. I will explain these later. Retrofitting and rebuilding, demolishing and recycling. Examples of conservation restoration, usually the work of conservators and architects, but firstly by building conservators. And what we do is not much. Usually in these cases, we want to prolong the life of structures, for instance. We like to fix things if they're broken, not otherwise. And again, careful and controlled maintenance based on good knowledge on the history of the building. Architectural conservation is more the line of architects' work together with conservators. In architectural conservation, we also use the word restoration for this, but like I said, we want to establish a vocabulary worldwide that everyone would understand. So that's why I'm not talking about restoration, I'm talking about architectural conservation, like Jukka Jokilehto in ICROM has suggested. So what we do in architectural conservation is much more than we do in restoration conservation. I think in some cases we might even see reconstructions in architectural conservation cases. But the most important thing is that we have all 5 different approaches in every project. Not only one of these, but all of them have to be used. And this is a diagram showing how architectural conservation is done. We have the inventory phase, we have the documentation phase, and we have the restoration report phase, and some issues that are taken into consideration in each phase. Architectural problem solving is another thing. This is usually done by architects and engineers. We have these adaptive reuse things and refurbishments in this group. And also energy efficiency things, accessibility things. Those things we have to do in a building even though it's considered valuable and even though it's protected. And I have an example here about, this is an industrial building in Helsinki where they used to make beer. It was a brewery and it was changed into an insurance company office building. Okay, it looked like an office building already when it was a brewery, but still the change was fundamental. And what they did was that the first floor wall, that used to be a brick wall, they wanted to change it into a glass wall because an insurance company wants customers to come in and a brewery wants customers to stay out and go into the pub and drink the beer. So they made a combination of a brick wall and glass facade. And they, on the below picture, not very visible here now, but that is a combination of a glass wall and brick wall. So this is typically architectural problem solving. This is something that architects want to design and do tricks like this. Okay, then we're going to rougher things, retrofitting and rebuilding. Again, more in the line of engineers and less architects. And in this case, we're talking about replacing building parts and modernizing the mechanical systems and pipes and etc. And the last thing you want to do is demolition, but if you do that, you should also have recycling. And first of all, the reuse of building parts, but if you cannot do that, then you might recycle the materials. And when we talk about modern architecture, there are different types of modern in the world. So there are many ways of dividing modern architecture sites from each other, and this is something that came up with a discussion with Wessel de Jong from a Dutchman from Holland, and he talks about programmatic architecture and houses that were designed with a program from the beginning. And in this conference, you have used Avant-Garde modern as a term for programmatic architecture, and I think it's about the same thing. We're talking about the same, almost the same matter. And then there's modern style architecture. And this would be architecture without a program of use, or without a program of distinguishing the different uses in the building and showing it in the architecture. So what we have in the programmatic architecture are the structures and forms based on functions. The building is a machine made for its use. The design is based on a program. And modern style architecture would be structures and forms made in modern style, functionality made with mechanical and electrical systems, and the design is based on standardization. So I would say that modern style would be could be used for suburban developments or these types of mass production housing, for instance, without a special program. And then we have different approaches to different moderns. In the first case, the Avant-Garde case, you would have conservation restoration and good management for the existing building firstly. You might have some architectural conservation for improvements in sustainability without changing the use. You might have architectural problem solving in adaptive reuse cases. But in these modern style architecture cases, you might do more, or you might be able to do more. For instance, the architectural problem solving through a new program, introducing new functionality to the building might be possible. Refurbishment by using sustainable technology or less or no mechanical systems. We can even go back if the building has had a certain mechanical system which wasn't working very good. We can take it away and go back to natural ventilation, for instance. Retrofitting as an alternative to demolition. Again, the last resort in a way. This is, yeah. Thank you. And this is the Paimio Sanatorium Conservation Management Plan available in the internet in the Alvar Aalto site. You can see the address below. It's about 400 pages, so we didn't bring you printouts, but I have brought you maps that contain all Alvar Aalto sites in the whole world. So get your own copy. And my last subject is the World Heritage nomination. In the picture you see the Venice pavilion, the Finnish pavilion in the Biennale Giardini in Venice, and that's so far the only Alvar Aalto site in the World Heritage List. But we hope that there will be more. And altogether we have about 13 to 15 possibilities. And what we're doing at the moment is we're thinking about themes, and under these themes we're thinking about what buildings belong to each theme. And here is a rough list. Fortunately, you cannot see it because this is still a secret. But we have Paimio as the architecture for cure. We have the Viipuri Library, architecture for the eye and ear. We have architectural industrialism, the Sunila pulp mill, for instance. We have great modern homes like the Villa Mairea or Maison Carré. We have free-form brick modern, like the MIT Baker House dormitory near Boston. Public human scale in the Säännötsalo Town Hall. We have experimental building, the Aalto Summer Home, Muratsalo Experimental House. We have an indoor piazza for the north in Aalto's Iron House. We have sacral woodland church architecture in the woods. We have a dialogue between free and regular form, the House of Culture. We have a green campus in Jyväskylä and in Espoo. We have a modern forum, which would be the civic centers by Aalto, one in Wolfsburg in Germany. And we have the city of the future, unrealized Helsinki city center plan, where only the Finlandia house was realized. But I end here. This is our new logo.
Good morning. Developed the presentation in English but I will do it in Armenian, for which I'm sorry. I apologize. Before, there are Armenian speakers and English speakers correspondingly. So this is going to be in two parts. The second part will be presented at the lake tomorrow, right away at the structure, and we will be telling you about everything that's being planned for the building or the processes going on. But today, I will try to present part of it not to our local partners, to our guests, in fact, to tell you what the situation is with conservation of heritage. And I will share with you some data regarding the processes that we have started at the lake and in this project at the lake, so that might serve a good precedent in the sector of conservation in general. So let me tell you that the total territory of Armenia is 30,000 square kilometers, close to that, a little bit less than that, and we have a list of protected elements, about 27,000 in about 6,000 different sites. For example, the Khanko Apet library could be one of those sites where the building might be subject to conservation, and one of the frescoes could be a point of different project as well. But in the global context, this is very dense, let me put it this way. It's quite densely populated with sites and objects. But just some more statistics out of this 27,000. Only in 3 sites we have fully protected, conserved historical areas like streets or districts, which to a certain extent also proves the logic behind the conservation of heritage here in the Republic of Armenia. And one of the most important problems that we regularly face here in Armenia is this point approach, kind of some segregation, like they're not protected in their historical context as whole area or site, but just parts of it. And another statistical information that might add up to this puzzle is that some cities have some documents in Armenia that are like the master plans for the development of the urban infrastructure, and only for 2 of them, with reservations, for 3 of them, this conservation documents, certificates have been granted. So we have 6,000 monuments or heritage areas in the country, but only in 2 or maximum 3 cases they are in urban settings and have been granted corresponding documents or certificates. None of these have been approved per se. They have been done that like a goal in itself, and none of those are protected by law. Another situation that when having these many sites and being so rich, even in the global context, playing a very important role, especially in terms of medieval architecture heritage, we have only 3 monuments that are in UNESCO World Conservation List, and another 3 have been candidates for that list for about 20 years now, not yet getting that honor. And so they applied initially with all the 6. 3 got that immediately, the other 3 are still tentative. So Armenia joined the convention in 2009 and only 2010, and the non-material convention also we ratified it. And then we have already 4 sites after that, which proves that having very rich heritage, the material heritage is really very vulnerable in Armenia, but we'll be discussing that specifically now. This is what you have seen on the left side, and in this the Youth Palace. It was one of those protected monuments during the Soviet time. And when they revised the list of the conservation with the main purpose of somehow unloading it because they were overloaded during the 50s, 60s, they removed a lot of buildings from that list. So the Youth Palace was one of those. The story is very interesting. Designed as a center for youth, something like that, but in fact this multi-story building was a hotel. And after independence it was privatized, and the reason it was removed, destroyed, was that there was no servicing, no maintenance. But you can see it in all catalogs and booklets that were telling you about Yerevan. There was no air ventilation sufficient, and with that, only that justification, they decided to destroy the whole building. So it could be easily solved if that was the problem. And here on the right side, you can see the remnants. So if theoretically we had good air ventilation and the building was among the protected, conserved monuments, then the owners might have thought that they would not have 5-star hotels, but 4-star hotel, for example, with a different type of air ventilation, etc. And there are numerous such examples. Another fantastic architecturally corner here in Yerevan, the cafe for the youth, once again, designed by the same group of architects who did the Youth Palace, who did Russia movie theater. So this is how it looks now on the right side. This is inside Kino Russia, the Russia movie theater. All these beautiful, nice hanging precasts are now just good storage areas. It's just a storage for a fair that is called mall now, but it's not a mall, it's just a fair. It's just a retail trading area, and they store their goods inside the movie theater. Another very important building that I suppose contains the whole heritage of the 20th century of Soviet Armenia. I suppose today, during our city tour, I will be showing you this building as well. So, one of the best buildings, 1930s, part of it purchased by a different owner, and now just entertainment there. And you can see the crystal candelabra. So, and also the so-called piteous, painful stories. Next to those, I'd like to bring a different context. So you can see the Moscow Summer Movie Theater open, and this was one of the cases, and the only one, by the way, when it was possible to restore the protection, conservation status for an area that was under clear threat. So it was possible to obtain this in 2010, and that became a very nice precedent for a discourse that started in Armenia, the discussion that the Soviet heritage is very important, and there are these triumphal, victorious campaigns, in parentheses, that I mentioned. But the reasons, well, reasons is much longer conversation and discussion, but one of the dominant problems here, I'm trying to be a little bit critical with this and not to be restrained in any way when discussing this, is the misunderstanding, the misperception of the heritage per se, of Yerevan. Because we get to deal with the phenomenon of Tamanyan here in Yerevan, and a whole area was like a dominating period of time of Yerevan, of Tamanyan times, etc. And now you can see the master plan of Yerevan that's been used in different formats. On the right side is one of the Armenian chocolate producers with this chocolate box. It looks exactly like Yerevan master plan. In the center, you see a map that is drawn on the floor of one of the famous restaurants in Yerevan. You can also see the city center hotel with the same, and your hotel also has it. Only Yerevan center, though, downtown, so-called. So this clearly points to the main problem, is this strong misunderstanding by the chief architect of Yerevan, who is dictating what Yerevan should look like. And another vivid example that we're going to see today as well is Araratyan Street, or the Northern Avenue as we call it. In the first two, you see what Tamanyan did, what he suggested, what he recommended to have the street look like, and then after return of Mazmanyan, Mazmanyan in exile, and then he comes back to this point of this main street of Yerevan. After independence of 1991, some ideas they thought that were not implemented in the Soviet times could be implemented in the new independent time of Armenia, and they did it. The Northern Avenue. And one of the most important things, when you go and stand there at the Northern Avenue, you will see this picture today. Well, a little bit different, not so well appreciating the role of the opera. But this was, by the way, designed in 1960, in continuation of the idea by Tamanyan. And the discussions of the reconstruction of the Northern Avenue are going on right now. I've been having these discussions with different architects participating in the construction. So during one of these discussions, one of the architects would bring this and say, this is how it should look, not how it looks now. So the idea by Tamanyan in 1924, that was already 50, 60 years old when they started rethinking it in 1984, 1991, 1992, kind of revived, and then implemented in 2002, 2003. Now, this is the district. Photo made in the beginning of 2000. You can see right here, that's the opera, and this is the street, and this is the condition now, from the same viewpoint. The same viewpoint, from the roof of the National Gallery. And this is where you can see the changes that were made. You can clearly compare this to this. And you can also say what happened. You can clearly say that. Some empirical statistical information exists also here, and I do not want to go into this process of complete extermination of the architectural mind of that period, but that brought a different discourse with a lot of attention on the part of the architects related to protection of heritage in Armenia in general. And today you can see some comics here using the master plan, or Tamanyan as the chief architect used. And here, even though some of the residents of Yerevan complain about what happens with them, but when you ask them, everyone would say Tamanyan's idea did not come true. That's what people know, mostly. But in fact, what they complain of is the corollary of Tamanyan's idea. So there's like this misunderstanding that might have different reasons. And one of those reasons is that we are not able, we have failed to present what it should look like to our population. And during these discussions, and this is another rally when they wanted to start opening some retail outlets in one of the parks. a grove, I would say, in Yerevan, and for about 3 months the youth would have demonstrations there. And this is the poster that we developed. It says, "Do not distort the master plan of Yerevan," meaning the problem is not that you should not continue building in green areas, but you still continue distorting Yerevan that was designed by Tamanyan 100 years ago, etc. So, I mean, this is once again a very interesting challenge for the population of the capital. But of course, it brings all this to the possibility of solutions, and Zhenya was talking about that as well. So essentially, part of protection is related to the insufficiency, the shortcomings of the legislation. So problems emanate from that in the first place, but in the thinking of the people, it's still the master plan devised by Tamanyan that never came true, and it didn't come true because some people came into power, they don't have idea about architecture, etc. That persists up to date. We had the political will to develop such documents, indeed. And on this picture, you can see the master plan for the center of Yerevan approved by the city hall. Like if you want to build something in the center and you want to get the understanding from the website of the city hall where you can do what and where you cannot, you can download this 7-page document, and the first 3 parts are all just declarative statements, and then the real designs in very small files that you can never understand what this is about. Never. This shows how complex the situation is. We have a master plan, we want to keep the master plan, the government wants to do that or doesn't want to do that. Some people say, we have done that, it's on the website, but these are all myths and manipulations by a group of people, and no one solves the problem. And another picture I saw just 2 days ago. One of the streets in the center of Yerevan, the red line mentions the permissible parking, paid parking. I mean, you can pay and park there. The red line, and it's been a long time now that the company who owns these red lines is a private company. They just get 100% of the income. You can see that the traffic line doesn't fit. I mean, you can see where the red line is and where the white lines are corresponding. It's like 20 centimeters. It's natural that no car may pass in between these 20 centimeters if there is one parked right there. So, and this is just someone decided. And also some chairs over there, which means you should not park there, even though it's a red line publicly available for parking. I'm just getting emotional. He thought I'm trying to tell him something. Okay, so we speak of Yerevan a lot, but this sinister problem occurs in Gyumri, the second largest city of Armenia, as well. And, well, Gyumri, just for you to know, was the city where the earthquake happened in 1988, when we had 35,000 casualties, and Gyumri is socially one of the most poor cities in the country. And these are the so-called pits for the water supply, wastewater collection, the water company, and another myth written on the lid of that pit. Okay, another part of my presentation is related to what we have planned with the funds granted by Getty Foundation, together with Ruben and a number of other colleagues of ours. So first of all, the story. Very interesting, by the way. Apparently it was in 2010 that we succeeded in conserving the summer, the open movie theater, and we were trying to do some steps in order to continue this work, because as Tommi mentioned, conservation is one thing on the paper and completely different in life. So it was that year when we were discussing this with Ruben and it was the summer hall of Moscow Theater that we were told it was private property. And that's when I suggested the retreat in Sevan, because the owner was not private, it was public property. And it was much more a comfortable option for such rehabilitation, revival. But then we forgot about that conversation. We kept it somewhere in a drawer. And then we started another initiative, this time with the Getty Foundation, to think of this option as well and develop the package. So when we were starting the process, Ruben told us about all the archives and the research that he had conducted before that in Moscow and in Yerevan. There are fantastically interesting materials that he has, by the way. And then we conducted a number of studies, one of which was related to a technical assessment of a building, physical assessment of a building, I would say. So we studied all the components of the building, we documented, described, and assessed. Ruben presented part of these, and then we understood which parts of the building were renovated, restored, reconstructed, some annexes, because starting 1930s, the building obtained 8 to 9 additional layers. The Hai Nachagits Institute, Armenian Design in translation, one of the largest design institutes of the country, conducted the constructive assessment of the building, and gladly for us, we found some possible solutions. We found this famous restaurant that everyone knows on this balcony. Apart from the solutions that were very primitive, it's quite in a good condition at this moment. So at the time it was designed in the Soviet period, it was designed with very simple solutions. Even though Armenia is in a seismic area, 7 degrees magnitude was the highest requirement, and then it was 9 assigned by the government after that period of time, respectively. The building is for 7, but not for 9. But Hai Nachagits Institute suggested the strategy and the policy that we could essentially preserve that in that condition without making any reconstructional changes, without making any significant changes. We could bring it up, we could kind of improve, retrofit it to a certain extent. Now you can see what the building looks like. A lot of moisture accumulated on different walls. We're going to have fundamental changes herein, and we will tell you the very preliminary thoughts of ours about the changes that might occur on this building in the future. I'm using the wrong word, but we conducted the so-called color pattern analysis, anthropological, if I can say so. I don't want to use the word anthropological, but I have to in this case. I mean, we kind of did the openings, different parts of the buildings to identify the patterns in different parts of it, and the layers of patterns accumulated through years. So that was quite an interesting piece of information for us to understand the history of the building, because the study that we conducted with Ruben brought us to an interesting phenomenon that there were no photos made inside the building at all. No photography. I mean, the building being very official, used for some official purposes, etc., maybe, but no one ever thought of making a single photo inside it. And by the way, I'm not the name the person, but he said, I have a couple of photos, but I think it's a shame to show them to you. I'll remove parts of those with Photoshop and then give you the photos. Funny. So, and then some challenges that we're facing in this management plan level now. In Armenia and in the post-Soviet territory in general, most of the problems usually depend on sustainability or self-sustainability, I would say, of the designs. Well, it's an interesting phenomenon. In Soviet periods, when buildings were designed, they would never plan for example, where would the cleaning lady put the accessories, the cleaning instruments, equipment, etc. And then they additionally some annex and some I don't know what's to separate parts of the rooms to have these ladies keep their clothes and uniforms, whatever. And there are numerous buildings also with quite extraordinary solutions, but a very, very poor possibility of replacing the light bulbs, for example. There were areas that you really think that you have to restore it in a manner so that it's even serviced properly. In the first part of my presentation, I mentioned a number of problems, one of the series of which is Sevan Peninsula, embarrassing condition really of the peninsula in terms of the construction that has happened to it. You will see that. The next is the building could be used as a resort for some balneological purposes, but to what extent it suffices the requirements is a question. The issue of accessibility, that starting from Finland and ending up anywhere else is a problem in Armenia as well, and the inner space, absence of any information about what it is inside. I wouldn't say even absence of information, but I wouldn't say lack of information, but absence of it from the very beginning. Like there was no info on it from the very beginning. Thank you. And this is the scheme devised by our hotel consultant. But he conducted also a very interesting study saying that in all the hotels around Lake Sevan, compared to those, this one has some advantages. So when we were applying to get the foundation in consideration of the issue of self-sustainability, we also suggested that we had to have a business consultant who might offer a good business model that might be of use in the future. This is the landscape conservation condition, the area environmentally. You know, it was an island before 1930. And you can see the hotels mentioned in red. And then in 1960s, it became a peninsula. And in 2017, essentially, all these new buildings came on it, newly built, kind of saturated the peninsula, significantly impacting, influencing not only the landscape of this building, but the landscape of the whole peninsula and the Lake Sevan as well, aesthetically. So one of the optimistic news is that in result of increase of the level that the government program required, some of these buildings will stay underwater. They will be removed anyway, but now they are facing the urgency of doing that. This is the sign, this is the building right here, and I'm thinking that the sign that was developed in the Soviet time will be a landmark, if I can say so, for us or for those who would start thinking about the restoration of the landscape to allow like a certain amount of construction on the peninsula. And another problem that we will be discussing eloquently, well, provided Ruben said that the building of 1960 was well maintained, our main concerns are about the one of 1930. So here you can see a building of 1963, I mean the side wall, and then some changes on the facade that were made later. We'll tell you about those tomorrow. And of course the accessibility of the building, as I mentioned, I don't know, some restraints to mobility inside, let me put it this way, that we have also tried to evaluate. And as in all the other modernistic buildings, those are very important. Here you can see the 4 scenarios that we plan, one of which has already been chosen, and we'll tell you that tomorrow. My time's up, apparently. And is it? Okay, they tell me I have 30 minutes, so do I? No, I'm done. Thank you. of conserving the interior is very important. We have invited Aleksandra to cooperate in the framework of the project implementation as one of the consultants, just reconsidering the interiors of the 30s in order to bring us the professional understanding of the interior of the buildings that people perceived, yet the people saw in 1930s. Aleksandra Selivanova is one of the prominent scientists studying the Soviet avant-garde, well celebrated, let me say. Alexandra is also very active in different conferences, and she is very active in organizing exhibitions, the well-known Snowmelt and Bagovsky experiment, the Tau, maybe. And, so I'm hoping I will be able to see. And Alexandra's presentation will be fully devoted to the Soviet interior of 20s, 30s, and the history thereof. Good morning, distinguished colleagues. Thank you, Ruben, for the invitation. This is a great opportunity to be in Yerevan first time, by the way. I'm truly impressed. And thank you for the opportunity to tell you about this interesting topic. I may not say that I have been like specializing on this. I'm doing architecture of 20s, 30s generally, most of the time. However, in this specific case, I had a different errand I wanted to implement, to overcome, to tell you about something that did not exist, in fact, physically. And that was the Sevan retreat. Well, we don't have data, we don't have information about the interior, and we don't know what purpose it had to serve. So that is why what I was doing was truly an abstract, needed a lot of abstract thinking, and we found a lot of interesting facts, maybe not facts but suppositions regarding what could have happened there regarding the interior, what could be there in the architecture of the avant-garde era, but that didn't happen again, and it was truly very interesting, and I'll try to tell you why it didn't. So essentially, I'm coming back now to what Vladimir Paperny showed yesterday, talking about this condescending construction ideas and concepts, and indeed it was considered to be very significant, very important. These are excerpts from the art book. I forgot how it's called in Russian, I'm sorry. The Art of Everyday, that's if I can translate it, so for the mass, right here. So this is the early concept, 1925, but the furnishing solutions of the theater, but of course everything was also planned for completely different functions and for everyday life. And we can also see similar ideas persisting in the same 1925, implemented by Rodchenko in Paris. And this is the key moment, is that all of these ideas never traveled farther than design, than experiments. Nothing ever was implemented, nothing ever worked there. There were these constructivistic buildings actively created all around the country, but I'll show you what is inside. Like, this never existed inside, I can surely tell you. Very actively, the ideas and design would be developed in photomass and then photoin. There was a faculty, by the way, of wood processing and metallurgy. The main slogan was that more engineers, the better. And students were essentially designing furniture and manufacturing equipment for factories, etc. So, very important things that were done by the students primarily. First of all, A. Lisitsky and Vladimir Tatin. So the fact that these two trained the students, of course, had its traces, had its impact. Well, Lisitsky's students would rather develop this transformer furniture that you can not see very well on the screen. I mean, these were this opening, closing beds from walls. These were the wardrobes that would be a wall between the kitchen and the living room, working as a wall kind of. And also, if you open the doors, you could pass something to kitchen or from kitchen, take something from kitchen. Whereas Tatlin's students would do chairs without springs, but using the natural elasticity of wood to soften the moment of the person sitting on it somehow. So this is more Tatlin's school, I would say. Of course, the Western schools and experiences were also important for them, and we will discuss that necessarily. So this slogan of more engineers into the everyday life is important in the sense of what Lisitsky thought at the time, because Lisitsky had a very clear vision of the interior at the time. He would say that interior is not just interior, it's just the environment, ambience for creating new livelihood, because interior without equipment is just a box. So that equipment has to be there and that box has to be filled somehow. In 1928, in his presentation of art prerequisites to standardization of furniture, he mentioned 5 things. He would try to contribute some formalistic approaches to this existence of furniture, saying, why would modern accessories or gadgets have positive impression on us? First, because they express themselves, they are frank. They do not have any hidden agendas in themselves. They are considered as integral, complex ideas, not obscure. They are primitive, simple, but they're not poor. They distinguish us from pompousness. They are elementary. They are geometrically correct. And fifth is that they were handmade, with the use of some production equipment, manufacturing equipment. Well, very soon we will see that these ideas would vanish without trace. But yet, second part of 20s, everything is being actively well formulated. And of course, exchange of ideas and the impact of the Low House would take place here. In Photomass, the first exhibition would be organized in 1928. You can see the poster, 1927, I'm sorry, and the bigger part of the block is occupied with works brought from Beinhaus. And I should say, if theatrical projects, designs of Schlemmer did not have any significant influence on the Soviet audience, the applied disciplines, furniture, of course, had great influence. As one of the critics would say of the time, design is interesting in regard to accessories that are used in everyday life, essentially, the interior, etc. So everything has been studied very well. And after 1927, the next active kind of meeting with Bauhaus takes place in 1931. I'm now showing you photos from the archive of Fine Arts Museum named after Alexander Pushkin, because at the time it was called the Museum of New Western Culture and Art. Bauhaus exhibition was held there, and this is when you see Alabian, on this photo, 1931. On the left is Boris Cernovets, who is the director of the museum, and Jonas Malmberg, who essentially was the one who brought the Bauhaus to USSR. And on the left is the draft of the typed communication with the list of all the exhibits. Here you can see the metallic transforming chair, then cupboard, table, etc. And a lot of fabric, by the way, and all that was brought once again to the Soviet Union, to the USSR, and of course, well perceived quite actively, absorbed, I would say, and there was a lot of photography of interior. Photography made by students together with this student cooperation, this trade union school of Bernau, and 90 people's apartments in Tartan. That's how they were called, people's apartments. Also, it was very important to do the analysis of Garanov House, and done by a student named Moiman, essentially in attempt to analyze the interior in the first place. So, Arkady Mardvinov, let me remind that is one of the most renowned architects, a person who has been in very active communication with Karl Alabyan and Kochar and Mazmanyan, the whole team that would later come into the play regarding the decisions in Yerevan and also the construction of the retreat in Sevan, mentioned the scientific method in designing these things, saying that typology, rationalization are well developed, impacting the designs themselves. And all that were precedents, were the platforms on which the further analysis was conducted. And of course published. So I told you a little bit about the association. Now let me tell you a little bit about the constructivists. In the typological section, that was Scientific Research Project Design Institute, developing residential designs with Ginsburg, Bartsch, Lisinski, and a number of other architects. But the core was the possibility of unifying the contemporary architectural mind. So it was this two-layer residential solution, but I suppose most of you know these sketches. That's the Narkanfin. That's the People's Committee of Finance in Moscow. Narkomat, that's how it's called. So coming back to the point that Lisitsky, with his students, implemented the sketch, developed the sketch, and conducted he kind of fixed the parts of the interior by making photos and proving how it should be looking in the end, kind of making these small cells herein. At the same time, with having very little space, they were thinking of a lot of functionalities. The bedroom, for example, close to the ceiling in the upper layer, the working area, the cameral part, kind of, and the dining part closer to the center. So here you can see some other pictures visualizing done by the team of Ginsburg. And this one, the photography already, second out of 3 this community houses made in Moscow in this F-cell format, meaning 2-layer. This is Gogolevsky Boulevard with the architects living in, by the way. The bureau working on the first floor, the second floor, and the first floor was essentially the place where they were doing their design. So essentially the people living inside also found the best fitting and comfortable furniture for their own cells, putting it up into the design. And this is what has been done. And this is also important because they brought this very unique, specific kitchen equipment, of course considering the international experience and taking some excerpts and experiences from America, from Germany, Well, of course, all that was known to a certain extent, but what Solomon Lisagor suggested at the time was different in principle, because it was a cupboard, for example, that could stand in any part of the apartment at the same time. I mean, it was mobile, it could be moved, it was portable, meaning, so it was not fixed in a certain part of the apartment, not the kitchen at least. This is how they planned it, and this is how they implemented it in the cells in this community house on Gogolevsky Boulevard. So, I mean, this door would close the working part, this working niche, and inside there were just drawers for, I don't know, cutlery and plates, and the sink for washing, and everything was in it. We did the reconstruction that was always a sketch, and never was implemented. We just wanted to see how it would really work, or did it work at all. And then we restored the designs. So, another important thing is what Stroikom was doing, the construction committee, and Ginsburg and Lisagor. They were developing the first versions of this combined transformer furniture. On the left is the Ginsburg's work, and on the right is what was developed a little later at the Institute of Industrialization of Residential Construction. That happened a little later. So, everything that I showed regarding the combined furniture was actively connected to the concept of a green city that was developed by Ginsburg and Barsh in 1930. That was the idea completely based upon disurbanization. This is a linear ribbon of buildings along the Yaroslavsky road, highway, that had to have this living boxes. I may call it boxes, I'm clearly sure I can call it boxes. And then this was the experimental version, built like this. So inside we had to have this combined furniture. And now, what happened later? 32-33 years, 1932-1933, the Union of Soviet Architects is established. Full criticism in the address of constructivism and change of aesthetics that I think is clearly understandable. I mean, quite reasonable, with a lot of reasons. But interestingly, there is some trace of the ideas of 1920s, 30s found in this Research Institute of Industrialization of Residential Construction that was in Moscow in the mid-30s, where the same students used to work. Students of Tatlin and Lisitsky used to work. At least we can read their surnames and understand it was so. So they were developing, as they thought, state-of-art, contemporary, solution, modern, like IKEA looks today, furniture. So this is the building of 1934, the book, I'm sorry, of 1934, directory, where they would present different types of furniture. I'm sorry for the quality of the pictures, not well scanned from the books. But they would speak a lot about the inbuilt furniture, but all remained in the books only. The important thing is that this movement started in 1930s, but it was never manufactured. But what happened? In fact, different construction trusts and plants would produce the same. In 30s, 40s, partially 50s, this is what they did. This is what you can see on the photography. This is the so-called inbuilt furniture, completely monolith. but reproducing this modernistic type handmade furniture of before 20s. I mean, it's really surprising how these could exist in parallel, despite the criticism and all the publications and all the exhibitions that were held at the time. In parallel to that, when you visited a store, you could buy only this. So you can also see a photography in one of those books saying family of the workers moving into a residential apartment. So this is this constructivist type residential area. I don't know where this was, in Usachovka or Habalovsk, whatever. So we see Venetian chairs, a table with the cover decorated with the portrait of Lenin on one of the columns, of course, and some new apartments with a lot of air and light that has to turn into a different or new form of collective livelihood. So we see interior that practically does not differ from traditions. I mean, the circular macrame type tissues and napkins, and the new thing is only this radio receiver hanging on the wall. One thing that was a little cheaper, more standard-like, in one of these community houses, not so well known for medical people, mostly medical staff, and in the common part of it, you can see this inbuilt furniture. Once again, standard solutions, these niches that were just filled with cupboards, wardrobes, any other storage type furniture pieces. So in the center, we found some of this, and now this is what we're showing. Pay attention to the right side of the slide. These cupboards in the kitchen completely have peasantry type made, handmade equipment. The irony being that this should be inbuilt because it has the inbuilt accessories. It had to be built up on brick walls in houses, so you could never take it with you. It was not portable. It was just, it belonged in there, which of course has no association to all those ideas that were worshipped by the architects themselves, the authors. So what happened then is that in parallel to the institute, the fate of which is unknown to me yet, apparently it ceased working in the mid-1930s. So in parallel to that, there is this workshop number 12 created, one of the workshops of Mossavet, City Hall, Moscow, municipality, the main mission of which was to develop equipment for the interior of kind of high-ranking guys, high-class people. I don't know, maybe for the larger hotels like Moscow Hotel or Subway that was being built at the time, larger retail stores, supermarkets, etc. So, interestingly, graphic artists worked there, like Borov and Young, who did development of posters and stamps in 1920s. And in 30s, they started suddenly designing furniture. Quite quality furniture, I should say, and corresponding to some requirements that were held in Europe, standards held in Europe, but not at all related to these ideas that I was talking of a little earlier, citing Lisitsky. So this one, another interior done by that team of the workshop number 12. This is a factory. This is the conference hall in the same building. This is the editorial printing part as well. And in the end, I just wanted to bring the real contrasting principles verbatim that were for the furniture of proletariat in 1930s. Just for you to understand the level of precision, accuracy, and credibility Lissitzky would expect. Application of polished surfaces with corners and cornices in order to show the movability and portability of a certain accessory, and ornaments of the surfaces would also be acceptable by bringing some variety to the methods of background building and putting checker type of construction there. And the application of engravements would also be possible, flat forms with bent accessories, parts made of chipboard and cardboard, the choice of the patterns of the colors, free, flexible. The new furniture allows separate elements of old styles like ornamental expressions of some forms of fine arts of the previous era. But by the way, this is not stylistic change. This is a change in the global concept for which the furniture is required and what it serves and what purposes it pursues in any interior, any building function interior meaning. So I mean, this is just about symbolic aesthetical parts expressing, and the people I was talking about initially would build something completely different world, I would even say. This is what Vladimir was saying. So the difference here is that some would create that world, the others already in the 30s would express it. So this is where I think the fundamental difference lies, and thank you for your attention.
I thought that the Paimio is a project that I explained to most of this audience already on March, so I will show some parts of that project and explain how they would be related to this current Sevan project, which will be continued then tomorrow. And then I'm happy to show you some images on Viipuri library. I use the Finnish word Viipuri since my grandmother was born in Viipuri, and I can't use the other name for this second largest city of Finland at the time. Sorry about that. And then in case we have some time, I could briefly introduce some ideas which we developed here during March when I was visiting Armenia for the first time with my great friends here. But so, first about Paimio Sanatorium, which Tommi mentioned already, and we were really lucky to be in the first group to get the grant for this, and I think I will really briefly tell you about the backgrounds, then about the sanatorium and how the obsolescence took place there while the treatments increased, and all this is valid for Sevan. Of course, it's not hospital, but we have to understand the similar changes in the world and the circumstances, why it was built, why the alterations took place there to be able to understand and evaluate the alterations. And then I'll tell you some points of our conservation management plan. I will leave out some issues like landscape and legislation and building techniques, ventilation being a large part of the study, but well, you're very welcome to study the report from our website. And then I'll show you two examples which were the principles there. I chose them so that they would be equivalent somewhat to ideas which we taught in Sevan. But the background for the sanatorium was that the tuberculosis being the huge problem, and in 1929 there was a legislation. Finnish state started to pay major deal of the building costs and 2/3 of the running expenses, and that meant that new 8 sanatoria were built within 4 years. Paimio Sanatorium being the last one of that group. And to solve the problem, there were altogether 19 sanatoria in Finland. Central sanatoria, smaller ones existed as well, and those were the municipal sanatoria were following the ideas coming from Germany, being kind of public health care starting and foundations for Nordic welfare state, I would think in some extent. And the last one of these sanatoria was completed in Muurala in Lapland. It's being the top of the small photo on the right, the top one. There was a sanatoria built in 20s, but it was destroyed during the Second World War, and I think the Muurala sanatorium was the last one in the whole world which was based on people reclining on the outdoor balconies, because at that time already medicine was available. But anyway, that's the context for this problem, young nation. We got our independence 1917, and this was the huge threat for the labor work and soldiers and everything new independent country and desperately needed. Well, by Malmö Sanatorium there was architectural competition. Construction began on April 1930, and it was completed in 1933. There is Alvar Aalto on the left-hand photograph, being quite a young boy actually at the time when he started with this project. And this was really one of the first projects that paved Aalto's international fame. It was published widely. The photo on the right-hand side is from the Architectural Review, which published already in 1933 this sanatorium, and also they had a large supplement showing timber furniture by Alvar Aalto and other colleagues. So it was really one of the really first steps for his fame. But then, well, the world developed in a good way in many senses. We have the annual mortality rate due to tuberculosis on the right-hand side, and we see that the original use of the sanatoria became unnecessary. And in 1965 there was a new law that allowed other patients than tuberculosis patients taken into these governmentally or municipally run hospitals. And in Paimio case, this middle picture shows how the balconies were glazed, and they were turned into interiors, and they survived. The picture on the right-hand side shows what happened in Kinkoma Sanatorium, designed by Paatela. They demolished all the balconies, so it's always an issue what to do with these. And then about some alterations, so it was renamed as a hospital in 1971, and internal medicine became there in the 70s, and the renovations were led still by Alvar Aalto's office, and Heikki Tarkka was the architect working for those, but it was quite harsh actually. You see the specially designed wash basins on the top picture. That picture is stolen from the Finnish Architecture Review 1977, where they criticized the renovation being too strong. And then 1994 it was protected as a national monument. And it was running as a hospital until 2015, when the last ward of the university hospital moved out. And a year earlier, already first parts of the current use, Mannerheim League for child welfare is there. It's actually really good use for the building, but the problem is that with less than half of the main building is in use, so it will be a constant issue there. What will happen there in the future? And then I have a large question mark here, but Tommi was explaining about the UNESCO World Heritage nomination. That could of course affect somewhat this building, and then we don't know about changes in ownership, but the current owner, they doesn't have any use for the building, but they are only renting it out. So there could be some other solutions for those. And these issues are, of course, such that the conservation management plan is necessarily needed to guideline the future and to find suitable uses for these buildings, which would, as Tommi said, the uses that would fit the building and not the other way around. Well, some things we did over the study or CMP project. One large task was that we have some 2,500 drawings in the archive in Jyväskylä, considering only Paimio Sanatorium. There are maybe 100,000 other drawings as well. But it was a huge puzzle because the building was completed in stages, so there was not a working drawing that would be even for the whole main building. So we did the kind of puzzle, put those drawings which we knew were accurate and were realized, we put them together and combined alterations and we were able to understand the original status of the building as well as the alterations which have been quite drastic over the years. And actually they became quite, you can't really see them here, but they became actually quite beautiful as well, because I think they convey also the graphic of each period when the alterations were done. And then one other big issue was the furniture. It's very fascinating, the building, in the way that this photo is taken before we started our project. You can see their original desk designed by Alvar Aalto for the chief physician of the sanatorium, and his leather upholstered plywood stool on the left, the black one, and then some later Aalto and Artec furniture in the front. So it was a huge combination, and still is, a huge mixture of Artec and Aalto furniture of various decades, and one big task was to make the inventory of the furniture, and then all the most valuable ones were marked so that they are now individually recognized, and if there is a tenant taking some part or leasing some of those furniture, wanting to have original furniture in the lobby, which is of course something that we would really love to have there. I think it's huge value in this building, having furniture from 1933 in the lobby still today in use. But those guidelines were also very necessary for this, to ensure that those furniture will not disappear when the tenant, for example, leaves. That it doesn't pack the furniture with him and just take them with him. And then some examples of the guidelines and recommendations. We chose almost 20 rooms or groups of spaces, some being really authentic and some changed a lot. And this was to create guidelines for different kinds of spaces there, because the complex was too large that we could have taken every single room into account, but we chose a variety of rooms and spaces so that you can kind of understand by observing another place there that this is equivalent to that space, for example. So all different ones were taken into account. This one major room, of course, is the main entrance hall. There is the photograph of the original status in 1930s, and a couple of pieces of the original shelves there for the patient shoes, being that round shape there behind, were found during the inventory in the basement. It was actually great pleasure. I called the maintenance man working there or starting to work there in the 1980s already. I called him that, hey, what kind of shelf we had there in the basement? If you went there, the particular stair down and looked on the right, could it be the original shoe shelf there. He said, well, I don't know, but I'll go and see. And then we studied and checked it, and we found out that there were some fragments of the original shoe shelves still left there, and we were happy to have one piece of those in our exhibition in Jyväskylä Museum, where we showed the results of the CMP in a special exhibition. But anyway, still, even though we had some of the fragments there, the alterations in the entrance hall had been really large ones, and also the spaces which are connected to that. The porter's cabin was introduced in 1958 by Aalto's office, and the corridor starting from the main entrance hall is also totally converted, as well as the elevators and the set of main doors, and also flooring. So our recommendation is that it wouldn't be the 1930s situation that would be taken as a status against which future alterations are compared, but it would be the 1958 status, because not only the entrance hall, but also the spaces which are directly connected to that are merely a result of the 50s situation, and it would mean somewhat irreversible changes that were taken there, so couldn't really take all those back. As well as we can think, these were still for the original use as a tuberculosis sanatorium, and designed in Aalto's office when Alvar Aalto was still well alive and participated in the design. And then the original ones being there for 25 years and the current status being there for 60 years. That's also one value to be understood. And then the other one, which I already referred, one of the key values in Paimio Sanatorium is the bold concrete structure. Philip Mortensen wrote in the Architectural Review in September 1933, even if Paimio were not the most revolutionary hospital building erected within the last decade, it would still be of immense significance on account of the structural methods adopted. And we can still fully understand this, and this concrete structure being most clearly visible on the balcony wing. But as I explained, in the 1950s there was medical treatment available and no longer people lying on the balconies, and the balconies were converted into interiors, having some nice Aalto furniture. You can't really see but in the middle one there is timber suspended ceiling and 60s Artec lighting and well, not in this picture, but several 60s Aalto furniture and Artec furniture being there. And then today's situation is, as you see on the right-hand side, so the balconies were closed. And when Paimio was lifted in tentative list for the World Heritage, ICOMOS was attacking quite strongly against these glazings, which according to their opinion is disrupting too much of the original appearance. Well, you may judge it yourself, but we thought that they were still quite actually elegantly done there in Aalto's office in the 60s, and because of the protection of the climate conditions, the balcony wing actually has survived until today. So there are two sides in this part. If it had left open there, I don't think the balcony would have stand over the decades there without any proper use. And then also the question how much we can really take back and step forward and return with these steps. I don't think it's really possible to to, or it will be really much of a reconstruction if those things were taken back there, and reconstruction will be something which I will discuss a little bit on the Viipuri library question, because that's merely a reconstruction. This one Tommi already mentioned to you, but I'll skip this one and continue then with a brief history of the Viipuri library, and then I'll show you some remarks on the restoration and reconstruction project, which was really right momentum for that, as I will explain to you. But the history of library started already before the Sanatorium. Alvar Aalto entered the competition 1927, and he won. And his competition entry pseudonym was 3Ws. I don't know what he referred to that, but that's quite fascinating coincidence, if I put it that way. But the design was still really classical, Nordic classicism, as you see. Alvar Aalto was really fond of Gunnar Asplund's, the Swedish famous architect, his project at the time, and we can see some references to those. But then it took on, and the classical features, they diminished by 1933 and 34, when the final design was done, and the construction work began in April 1935, and it was completed like this. This is the famous lecture hall there, and this being the main landing room. But then the Second World War started in March 1940. We got the peace treaty at Moscow, and according to that, Finland lost the parts which are marked on the map in red, and it was actually felt quite injustice, because we lost also Viipuri, which was not conquered over the Winter War. So we lost larger areas than what the Soviet troops actually had conquered. But still Finns wanted to sign the peace treaty, and there was, when the peace came, there was the flags at the halfway, which is kind of sorrowing, flagging means. So that was taken really strongly at the time. And in 1941, this I'm not sure this could be some kind of set up, this picture, but it's anyway found in the archives, showing the Aalto furniture being used and the library being fully used by Soviet citizens in 1941. But then the war continued, and Finnish troops conquered back Viipuri. This is photo taken by Finnish soldiers in 1941, showing the status of the library after the Winter War. And the library actually wasn't damaged that badly over the wartime. It got one bomb which didn't really explode, but it was it attacked some parts of the office wing. But otherwise, it was relatively well preserved. Of course, some windows were broken and such, but it wasn't like totally destroyed. But then there was the second peace treaty. Now I'll show you the areas which we lost at that time. The area named Porkkala there, it was actually only on lease for Soviets, so we got that back in the 50s, but let's not go to that detail. But anyway, Viipuri was lost again, and there is a photograph of 1950s, some Finnish having pilgrimage to their old home city, and this elk statue being quite quite a popular site there. So there are several photographs showing accidentally the status of the library, which happened to stand behind this statue, which was every time photographed when Finns were there. But there you can see the deserted library. So it was until 1955 it was empty, and then it was almost demolished. At least all the interiors were more or less lost at the time. And then something which Ruben already referred yesterday, this one being from November or December 1953, showing how the library would look in Soviet style, and something which we saw already in Sevan, and this one either didn't really become into realization, but the Rosenblum and Schwer did actually quite a good restoration, or they did the best what they could. They would have wanted to contact Aalto's office to get some original drawings, but at that time it probably was not suitable for Soviet Union to ask any help from Finns. So they had to cope with some photographs and newspapers and whatever they found in Viipuri, and they did the restoration as well as they could at the time, but still preserving the original character of the building, which was really important. And Aleksandra Schwer, he passed away, if I remember right, just a few years ago. So they have been able to interview him, and I think he was the key person to pass this library on for not to repair it and to have it in the continuous use since 1961. So it was really key moment for this building to survive at all. These are some photographs showing the status of the library in early 1990s and a bit later. And Tommi mentioned that the constant management which is needed, that was totally forgotten here as we see. So the international attention was drawn to the library, and I think also Getty gave some money later for the project. But the first initiative came from Elisa Aalto, the second wife of Alvar Aalto, an architect as well, and she was establishing the Finnish committee for the restoration of the Viipuri library, and they did collect or fundraise some money, and then they started to do first restoration actions there. One of the first ones being the large glass wall just next to the main entrance. It was completed already in 1994. And then they repaired roofings and skylights and everything. Gradually, 2008, they redone this roofing for ceiling for the lecture hall. But then there was Russian Federation funding. Our president at the time, driving this small vehicle, being Tarja Halonen, she met Vladimir Putin and asked that what would we do with this common library problem. And Putin replied, as far as we are told, that he doesn't know anything about any library problem. But then a couple of weeks later, they called from Russian embassy. They called to Alvar Aalto Foundation. We had Maija Kairamo working for decades in this restoration issues, and they interviewed Maija that what would be the problem, and Maija explained very nicely that we have been gradually working with this, and well, sometimes they have stolen the copper parts which we have just introduced in the ceiling, and well, some problems have been there, but well, actually the problem is money. And then it took a while, but the Russian Federation then gave the 6.5 million euros for the restoration, and then it really got into good pace because there was already a little bit of a problem because they had to start redo things which they had done already because it took so. It would have been kind of eternal restoration project because maybe similar to Golden Gate painting. When they get to other end, they have to restart with red paint again. On the other end, it would have been like that kind of project there, but then Putin solved the problem in a way. So the restoration started. There was Tapani Mustonen being the leading architect, working in Finland and having been working with very many Aalto sites and being one of the leading restoration architects in Finnish context. And this restoration was completed in November 2013. There is Maija Kairamo and the former president Tarja Halonen opening the library again. The restoration took a long time and there are some things which are worth mentioning on the restoration ideas. One was, or the first one I have here is that they kept the single glazed window in this lecture hall, so it's only like one piece of glass there. We had our Alvar Foundation staff meeting there when the library was completed. That was January, some minus 20 degrees at the time, being cold day there, and we were really freezing there. But on the other hand, that was one character of the 30s buildings, which is nowadays lost after all these energy efficiency issues. One piece which they kept from the Russian restoration or renovation was that original cloth storage in the main lobby was like the one in the left one, but it was felt impractical, and the Russians had already introduced a kind of normal desk having just coat racks behind that and the stuff being there, and that was kept. One thing was that they introduced already in the Soviet time some kind of cabinet for displays, which was on the top of this desk. So the desk was kind of heightened for some 10 or 15 centimeters to create some box where you could install whatsoever books or any small items to be on display. And that was redone again in the Mustonen's restoration or reconstruction, and now creating a kind of new feature there, while the glass is reflecting the roof lights, being not there in the original status, but on the other hand answering the issues which current uses have needed in the library. Then some furniture, some parts were redone, some parts are more current ones. Bookshelves and desks are not exactly as they were, but they are more flexible and reply to the current needs in the reading hall. And one thing was the main facade. In the 1950s restoration, they have installed their darker stone than what the original one was. That one was well in good condition when they started the restoration, but still they decided to replace it with the similar one that the original one was. And then also some lighting issues. On the left-hand side, you'll see those small hanging lights there. Those were in the 1930s there, but in the current restoration, they didn't want those because they felt that they would interrupt the ceiling, and there are kind of light podiums instead. So just some remarks. It's excellent work in research and design, and it's a reconstruction and restoration, probably more of a reconstruction because there were almost no features that were such that they were kept. And it's quite, let's say, a bit strange even to visit the building nowadays because it's like a new building being from the 30s, but without any patina or anything. So it's kind of a strange, ambivalent feeling there at the moment. It's like a time machine in a way. Of course, we are really happy that this took place like that, and it was kind of perfect timing in history. I'm not sure if it could happen today if the moment was really perfect in history for this very happy moment. But then on the other hand, maybe there could have been some more of discussion or more of thinking that preserving or removing layers or those issues. Now it seems that it was just solved a little bit case by case in like a, well, I tend to say that it's like the candy shop. You pick that one and you pick that one and you pick that one, but those which you don't like, you just leave them out. But well, it may be a really good result, but on the other hand, it would be also worth discussing in every case that what would be the really principle. But as I say, I'm and the whole foundation and everybody in Finland, we are really happy that this restoration and reconstruction took place, and it was awarded by Europa Nostra and the World Monuments Fund Modernism Prize as well. So don't misunderstand me. I'm not criticizing what was happened, but really happy of this moment. But then on the other hand, we are still worrying what would be the constant management plan, constant managing there. Will it really take place there in the future as well? And then I'll skip these because those will be for tomorrow's issue. But then I will just wish that you will return after this lecture. There will be Maria telling more about this. This is only nostalgia for me being from Tallinn, visiting it several times over the decades. This one being the Palace of Culture and Sports for Moscow Olympics. Part of that was kept in Tallinn, and I remember this palace already from late 80s. I went bowling there with a friend. We have a friendship school where we visited, so this is totally nostalgia for me. And but the current status is something that we don't wish to happen for the Sevan building. I have heard that there are some ideas for fundraising and restoration, but I'm not aware what kind of things will take place there. But hopefully something that will be sympathetic for the original architecture. Whereas the other building, which I remember from the 80s, buying postage stamp and sending postcards home, was the main Tallinn post office. The photograph I took from the architecture, how you say it, the tourist guide, architecture tourist guide, shows the original status, and then one photo which I took 5 years ago is in below, and then the current status, which is now a shopping center, had almost nothing to do with the original, quite bold 80s late Soviet modernist architecture. So I think these issues are very valuable to raise in question and think what kind of principles will be kept and held if these buildings are restored. Well, hopefully restored, but something could have been also done in other way with this post office. But I will stop with this now, and hopefully Maria will have after the lunch some other things than only nostalgia for us. Thank you.